What's up, Internet? This is Jacob, aka Jakish Colbino. Welcome back to another episode of the Hippie Critic Podcast. So in today's episode, we have a little bit of shopkeeping to do before we get to our topics of conversation. This week, we're going to be talking about the inauguration of President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. In addition to, the MCU is back. So we're going to be discussing WandaVision and what that means for the MCU moving forward. One core tenet of this channel, it's to be open and honest about how we feel about important events going on across the world. So there's no way we can avoid talking about the most recent transition of power from the US presidency. What happened at the Capitol weeks before, the inauguration itself, and what that means to us. So let's get right in. I think it's important for us to stop and take a breath of relief. This is a huge moment for our country and a step in the right direction. The inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was the first political event in years that didn't nearly kill me to watch. I used to be an avid follower of politics and news when I was growing up and in college up until the election of 2016. It was always stressful, but when Trump became the untrained, unfiltered mouthpiece of the Republican Party, and the Democrats were too toothless and spineless to do anything about it, I had to check out. For my mental health, I had to stay away from the news. I minored in journalism, and it is a legit passion of mine, but I couldn't stomach that the actual president of the United States was tweeting and speaking this diluted, hateful dribble, and his followers were just eating it up. I couldn't do it. So that's why today I can gladly take a breath of fresh air. And I can comfortably say it feels nice to be back in a country where our leaders, where our president and the cabinet appointees that he's picked, they speak with tact, with deliberation, with compassion, and we haven't had that in years. So it is a breath of fresh air. So I just want to take this moment to acknowledge what this means for our country. Take inventory and really appreciate this victory. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are officially in the White House. Now it's time to hold them, Trump, and the Capitol rioters accountable. 2 weeks before Joe Biden's inauguration, mobs of Trump supporters descended upon Washington, D.C. The group violently stormed into the Capitol building in a failed attempt to subvert our democracy's official and rightful confirmation of Joe Biden as our newly elected president. Make no mistake, this was a failed attempt at a paramilitary coup. Trump and the bootlickers who remained loyal to him not only ignored warnings of security threats to Congress, they actively encouraged seditious behavior through any means, including violence. We're not just talking about the throngs of gullible rednecks, Nazis, and Proud Boys. We're talking about the elected officials who have, on the record, called for treasonous behavior from their constituents. We're talking about, despite the fact that the FBI knew about an incoming assault on the Capitol, no additional security measures were taken, and the National Guard, the deployment was scrambled and obstructed by White House officials. We're talking about the literal footage of several members of the DC police allowing in and ushering in these seditious thugs into the Capitol building, knowing full well that they had violent intent. Compare that to the police's instigation of violence and brutality in the face of peaceful Black Lives Matter protests, and we get a clear depiction of how white supremacy is ingrained throughout the very fabric of this country's politics and systems of power. So all of that brings us to our first topic of discussion. Joe Biden made a public statement calling out the banality of the police response to the violent mob of gun-toting, mostly white seditionists, and compared it to the violence and brutality that faced peaceful Black Lives Matter protests across the country. Now that President Biden and Kamala Harris are officially in office with a Democratic majority, let's see what they're really about. I hope it's not all just lip service. Now, President Biden and Kamala both do have stains on their political record, as do any career politicians, with the exception of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the rest of the Justice Democrats. Shout out to y'all. Thank you for keeping it real. But those two in the White House, President Biden and Kamala Harris, they made us promises in their campaign. They promised to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and to invest heavily in sustainable energy. They promised the decriminalization of cannabis and removing any related charges from any criminal records. They promised to invest in communities of color who have suffered and been held back by a racist, unjust criminal justice system. They and several top Republicans promised that those who incited a failed insurrection attempt of our democratic process would be persecuted to the full extent of the law, which to me means like you treat them like they're black and give them the longest allowable prison sentence. Only difference is these guys will actually deserve it. Point is, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made us promises on their campaign. And those promises are why we voted them into office. It's our job to hold them accountable and make sure that they do their job, the job that we hired them to do. All right, so that's going to be it for our preview of this week's episode of the Hippie Critic Podcast. I wanted to do something a little bit different given the weight of the most recent events and the subject matter that this is. So I decided to experiment with a video format for the introduction, and the rest of the podcast is audio only. The rest of the podcast will be dropping later on this evening. So if you enjoyed the topic of conversation that we introduced here, go on ahead and subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and like that for me, so that way you can go ahead and you'll be notified when we do actually drop that next bit of content for you guys. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for checking it out. Any feedback is definitely appreciated. Go ahead and just leave some comments, any tips or suggestions. Let me know how you like the video format and if I should continue trying to work that in moving forward. Other than that, guys, thank you again. I really appreciate you guys, and well, take care.